Hola, 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 ¿qué tal todos? Bienvenidos a mi canal. Y para mis suscriptores, bienvenidos de vuelta. Me llamo Austin y el video de hoy es parte de una serie sobre las conjugaciones de los verbos de español. Today, we're going to learn how to talk in Spanish about completed actions that have happened at some point in time using the perfect tenses. Like I mentioned at the start of this series, there are 23 verb tenses in Spanish. If you've been following along with the series up to this point, you've already learned 10 verb tenses. This video is going to teach you 8 more, although I'm not technically teaching you any new tenses at all, but rather what's known as an aspect, because these are all just usages of the verb haber conjugated into the tenses I've already taught you. Like I've mentioned previously, the videos in this series are being released in a very specific order to build your understanding of all verb tenses as quickly as possible. So you'd be well served to watch my other videos. But I'll make sure to revisit the necessary information so that you can handle all the perfect tenses from just this video. Can you feel it? We're closing in on having a complete understanding of how to conjugate all Spanish verbs. Okay, so before we get started, the perfect tenses are all constructed using the verb haber, which is highly irregular, conjugated into a certain tense, which is then immediately followed by the past participle of our target verb. The past participle is a form of a verb that is used either as an adjective or to describe completed actions. The past participle, when used with haber to describe completed actions, takes only one form for each verb and will never change, no matter the subject or verb tense for haber. In English, our past participle is usually formed by adding ed to the end of the word, such as happened, copied, or lifted. Sometimes participles take on other forms like eaten, swum, or set, but they never change. In order to conjugate any verb into any perfect tense, we first need to know how to get our past participle of our target verb. While there are certainly a handful of irregular past participles in Spanish, the regular ones are super easy to conjugate, and most irregular verbs are handled regularly to get the past participle. Even our super irregular verbs ser and ir. For AR verbs, we just remove the AR and replace it with ado. So hablar becomes hablado. For ER and IR verbs, we remove the ER or IR and replace it with ido. So comer becomes comido and ir becomes ido. Now let's quickly go over our irregular past participles. Keep in mind that derivative verbs built from these irregular verbs share the same conjugations. Our 9 most common ones are hacer to hecho, decir to dicho, poner to puesto, ver to visto, morir to muerto, romper to roto, escribir to escrito, abrir to abierto, and volver to vuelto. Easy enough, right? Alright, so now let's dig into the main subject of the video, haber. The verb haber has many uses in Spanish and is probably the most irregular Spanish verb. So we're just going to have to memorize the conjugations individually. Within the context of this video, it's an auxiliary verb which translates to have, to say what has, had, will have, or would have happened. We started this series with the indicative mood, then we moved to the subjunctive, and then the imperative. Now we're going to start again with the indicative mood, starting with the present perfect, to say what has happened in the past. The present perfect conjugates haber in the simple present tense and is used to talk about recently completed actions, usually with effects still felt in the present moment. The conjugations are yo, he, tú, vos, has, él, ella, usted, ha, nosotros, nosotras, hemos, vosotros, vosotras, habéis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes, han. So to ask, have you gone to the store yet? We say, ¿ya has ido a la tienda? Next up, we have the past perfect, also called the pluperfect, which is regular for haber and uses imperfect past tense conjugations to talk about completed actions that had happened before something else happened. Conjugations are regular here, and they are yo había, tú, vos habías, él, ella, usted había, nosotros, nosotras habíamos, vosotros, vosotras habíais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes habían. So to say, I had already set the table before cooking, that's ya había puesto la mesa antes de cocinar. Now we look to the future, to speak on things that will have happened by a certain point using the future perfect. I've already covered all irregular future conjugations in the video in the link up top, but for haber specifically, the irregular conjugations are yo habré, tú, vos habrás, él, ella, usted habrá, nosotros, nosotras habremos, vosotros, vosotras habréis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes habrán. So to say, we'll have cleaned the house before my mom arrives, that's habremos limpiado la casa antes de que llegue mi mamá. Our final perfect tense in the indicative mood is the conditional perfect, which is how we say things that would have happened but didn't because of some reason or another. Conjugations are yo habría, tú, vos habrías, él, ella, usted habría, nosotros, nosotras habríamos, vosotros, vosotras habríais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes habrían. Translating I would have bought it, but I forgot, gives us lo habría traído, pero se me olvidó. Alright, that's all for the indicative, so let's start talking about things we don't feel certain of with the subjunctive mood. The present perfect subjunctive is used to talk subjectively about things whether or not we're sure they have happened in the present. Conjugations are yo haya, tú, vos hayas, él, ella, usted haya, nosotros, nosotras hayamos, vosotros, vosotras hayáis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes hayan. So if I want to say, I hope you've enjoyed the video, thank you so much for watching. That's espero que te haya gustado el video. Muchísimas gracias por ver. Quick note, in Spanish we don't like things, but instead we are pleased by things. So in this example, el video is actually the subject, and you are the indirect object with that te. So I'm literally saying, I hope the video has pleased you. Lastly, the past perfect or pluperfect subjunctive is used to talk subjectively about things whether or not they had happened at some point in the past. These final conjugations are yo hubiera, tú, vos hubieras, él, ella, usted hubiera, nosotros, nosotras hubiéramos, vosotros, vosotras hubierais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes hubieran. So to say, I wish you had come to the party, that's ojalá hubieras venido a la fiesta. Phew! That's a lot of conjugations, isn't it? Again, just remember, we already learned all of these tenses before, but we're just plugging in that to have verb haber in front of our action verb in its past participle form. Okay, now before we move on, let's just slow down for a moment. If you've gotten through all of that just now and are still hungry for more Spanish, just like I was when I was learning, I totally relate to you. The point of this series is to prepare us with everything we need to know to get ready to dive into the Spanish-speaking world as quickly as possible. And if you're ready to dive deeper now, comment on this video or email me at austinteachesspanish@gmail.com and I'll let you know how we can arrange private, solo, or group lessons to more effectively set you up for success with native speakers. Also, let me know if you're interested in downloading my conjugation spreadsheet for your reference as you begin to shift your focus from verb conjugations to learning vocabulary and phrases. All right, so now that we know every perfect tense, how about a few practice rounds? Like usual, I'm going to give you some sample sentences in English and translate them into Spanish with our target verbs unconjugated. Your task here is twofold. You'll need to get the correct past participle for our target verb, and you'll need to decide on the correct conjugation for haber. Make sure you review our irregular past participles and which tenses describe what has, had, will have, or would have happened using haber. Feel free to jump around the video as much as you need before deciding on your answer. Okay. Before we get started on that, I can imagine some of you are already getting ready to ask me, Austin, you said you teach us 8 tenses, but I only count 6. So why are you holding out, bro? Well, nothing gets past you, does it? That's great, because that curiosity is exactly what you need to become fluent. So, to answer your question, honestly, the reason is that the other 2 tenses aren't really used by native speakers, except in more literary contexts. But if you really want to know them, you've also got the preterite perfect to talk about completed actions that had happened immediately before another action, and the future perfect subjunctive. But this video is long enough already, so let's just focus on what we really need to become fluent. We ready for those practice rounds? I'll do a few extras today since we have so many perfect tenses to choose from. Enfócate, hagámoslo. Our first example is, have you gone to Latin America? I've always wanted to go. Our unconjugated translation is, haber ir a Latinoamérica, siempre haber querer ir. Do you think you've got it? ¿Has ido a Latinoamérica? Siempre he querido ir. All right, our next example is, I would have come to the football game if they had invited me. Our unconjugated translation here is, haber venir al partido de fútbol si me haber invitar. Do you remember our if-would statements from earlier in the series and which tenses are used for them? I'll give you a hint. One tense is in the indicative mood and the other one's in the subjunctive. Our answer is, habría venido al partido de fútbol si me hubieran invitado. All right, next up we have, it's concerning that he hasn't arrived yet. I hope that nothing's happened to him. Our unconjugated translation is, es preocupante que todavía no haber llegar. Espero que no le haber pasar nada. Make sure you remember when to use the subjunctive with the weirdo acronym. Ready for the answer? Es preocupante que todavía no haya llegado. Espero que no le haya pasado nada. All right, let's do a couple more. I had never tried sushi until today. I love it. That gives us nunca haber probar el sushi hasta hoy. Me encanta. Side note, you might be wondering, is sushi in Spanish really just el sushi? Well, yeah, think about it. We borrowed that word from Japanese to use in English, but it's still the same word. Well, Spanish speakers do the same thing. There are all sorts of names of things from other languages which are just borrowed to use in Spanish, like el bulgogi, la pizza, el ramen, and lots of others. Lots of those words don't follow standard pronunciation rules because they come from a different language. For example, Spanish doesn't use that SH sound in sushi or the double Z in pizza, but we make exceptions for those borrowed words. All right, back to the example. You ready for the answer? Nunca había probado el sushi hasta hoy. Me encanta. Our last example is, have you seen the results from the Super Bowl? I wish Kansas City had won. Now slow down, Eagles fans. I'm not a sports guy, and I honestly didn't even know who was playing until the morning of the game. So don't go disliking the video just because of that, okay? Our unconjugated translation is, haber ver los resultados del Super Bowl, ojalá haber ganar Kansas City. There's more borrowed words again, this time from English. They're specific names for specific things. So we don't always translate the words that make them up. We just include them as they are. Be mindful of this pattern when you're learning new vocabulary. Sometimes the best thing to do is not to translate, but we might tweak the pronunciation a little to make it more friendly to Spanish ears. All right, you ready for the answer? ¿Has visto los resultados del Super Bowl? Ojalá hubiera ganado Kansas City. All right, so how'd you do? If you got all of those answers right, hablas muy bien español. If you missed any of them, that's all right. We've got 6 tenses to pick from. So you might consider going back in the series to review the different tenses which haber gets used in if they gave you any trouble. The only important thing is that you keep pushing forward on your learning journey. Now before we wrap up, I want to talk about some other uses for the perfect aspect. Haber isn't the only verb we can use with this construction. Another big one is ser, to be. For example, we can say, your flight will be canceled if you don't pay the bill, by translating it to, tu vuelo será cancelado si no pagas la factura. Or, como no pagué la factura, mi vuelo fue cancelado. To say, since I didn't pay the bill, my flight was canceled. Be careful, if you do it this way, the conjugation for ser and your past participle will need to match the noun they're describing. So you might need to add an S or change the O to an A. For example, my blankets were stolen might be conjugated as mis cobijas fueron robadas. Just like with haber, we cannot separate our conjugation for ser from the past participle of our target verb. All right, well, that's everything I've got for you today. We now know 18 of the 23 verb tenses. If you found value in today's video, please let me and the YouTube algorithm know with that like button. My next video will cover the last 5 with the progressive tenses, which are just variations of the verb estar conjugated into the same tenses we already know, followed by the present participle to describe ongoing actions at a certain point in time. If you're ready to complete your understanding of all Spanish verb tenses, make sure you're subscribed and click that bell to be notified of all my videos so you don't miss what's coming next. After this series concludes, I've got some big plans that I think a lot of you out there will really enjoy, so stay tuned. Finally, as always, the best way to retain any new knowledge is to practice. So I encourage all of you to comment down below to practice what you've learned, making your own sentences with the perfect tenses. Think of things you might actually say out in the real world and use the website SpanishDict.com to look up vocabulary you want to include. I'll be around, so please comment with your questions as well. I'll make sure to reply to all comments, so I'll let you know how your sample sentences came out, and I'll answer any questions you might have. Espero que te haya gustado el video. Muchísimas gracias por ver. Nos vemos pronto.